Okay, thank you. So, apologies for those of you who are here yesterday afternoon and listening, because the first few slides are pretty much the same as I showed them, but I'll move rapidly through those. So, the job of ICRP Committee 2 is to develop dosimetric methodology and to calculate dose coefficients. And we're now responsible for doing that for all life forms, so non-human biota as well as humans. This shows the membership from this year through to 2021. So those in green are the new members who we welcome to their first meeting this week. So a very strong international team. And this shows the previous membership, previous term. So those we said goodbye to and thank them for their considerable efforts are shown in red here. But we are lucky to have a couple of those ex-members with us this week. So that's good. So dose coefficients, values of effective dose and equivalent dose to organs and tissues per unit intake for internal emitters, intakes by inhalation or ingestion, so sieverts per becquerel intake, and also exposures to external radiation. And to do that work, we have 6 current task groups. The first on radiopharmaceuticals is a joint task group with Committee 3. So that produces dose coefficients for exposure of patients, administration of radiopharmaceuticals. Second one on use of effective dose, and I'll be coming back to that with a few slides at the end of my talk. One on dose coefficients for external radiation, one on dose coefficients for internal radiation, and 2 on the development of phantoms. Now this just lists a number of recent reports produced by the committee, essentially all work in the development and publication of dose coefficients based on publication 103 methodology, that's the 2007 recommendations, other than publication 119 and 128, which are compilations of dose coefficients based on publication 60 methodology. And one thing to say about this is, as well as the ICRP publications, a substantial proportion of this work, or the basis for the work, is also published by members of the committee and the task groups in the open literature. And this just outlines planned publications for the forthcoming term and probably beyond. There are other ideas in the pipeline as well, but these are agreed publications. So a number on phantoms and associated calculations, a number on internal dose coefficients, radiopharmaceutical administrations, external dose coefficients, and then the use of effective dose. So you're going to hear more about this, but just one of the important changes in the publication 103, the 2007 recommendations, was the introduction of the idea of ICRP reference phantoms. So based on medical imaging, so the first time ICRP has its own phantoms, based on medical imaging, separate phantoms for males and females, so that then organ doses are calculated separately for males and females, and there's sex averaging in the calculation of effective dose. We'll hear much more about this from Maria later this afternoon. And also within Committee 2, we have work on conversion of those phantoms to Polygon mesh format, which then allows all calculations to be done within the one model, including calculation of doses to target layers, which can be micron thick within particular organs and tissues. So again, we'll be hearing about that from Chan-Hyung Kim in a little while. We'll also be hearing about dose coefficients for internal emitters from Francois Paquet later. This just lists the different parts of the series of reports on occupational intakes of radionuclides. The first two are already published. The third is in press. Other two are on their way. And Francois will also talk about dose coefficients for environmental exposures for the public. Now, within those within occupational intakes of radionuclides, part 3, for the first time will be dose coefficients for radon. So as for all other radionuclides, we look at all the isotopes, we consider ingestion and inhalation and give equivalent dose coefficients for organs as well as effective dose. But of course, the most important among all those is inhalation of radon-222 and its progeny. And for that, of course, there are epidemiological data as well as the ability to calculate dose coefficient using dosimetric methodology. So the report does refer to that epidemiology, and it refers to overall conclusions that the Commission has drawn in terms of recommended values, and those are shown here. So an overall recommendation of a value of 3 millisieverts per millijoule hour per meter cubed, around 10 millisieverts per working level month, for the majority of circumstances. And then a secondary value of twice that, 6 millisieverts per millijoule per hour per meter cubed, for particular circumstances, including tourist caves, and that's a recognition that the aerosol characteristics in tourist caves can be quite different, with a smaller aerosol component, which can then lead to greater dose per unit intake, and also for occupations work involving substantial physical activity where the breathing rates will be higher. The report will also contain, as for other elements in their radioisotopes, information on which to calculate site-specific dose coefficients should they be deemed necessary. So if you want to hear more about that, please go along to the talk by James Marsh. He's been very much involved and expert on radon in the ICRP work, and he's giving a talk in the ERPW session on internal dosimetry tomorrow. Okay, so just a few slides on the report on the use of effective dose. This has now received approval from the main commission to go to public consultation. There will be some more consideration following discussions this week with committees and feedback from members of the main commission. But I hope it will go to public consultation before the end of the year or early next year. And this just shows the membership of the committee to make the point that it is very much a cross-committee effort, so input from each of the committees. Now, a lot of the report goes through what has been said previously about effective dose, brings it together in one report and explains its application, what the quantity is and its applications. But there are a couple of differences from what has been said before, and I just want to highlight those now. So here are the quantities that we use in radiological protection. Absorbed dose as the starting point, equivalent dose to organs and tissues in sieverts, effective dose in sieverts. So what we're now saying is that absorbed dose in grey should be used to set limits to prevent tissue reactions, rather than what has been done, which is to use equivalent dose. And that is essentially because the radiation weighting factors used in the calculation of equivalent dose relate to stochastic effects. So equivalent dose, we're saying, should be seen as an intermediate step in the calculation of effective dose. What we're also saying is that we would introduce this change at the time that there are new general recommendations from ICRP, but this is just flagging up this intention. So then effective dose, as it says here, is this quantity that has proved very useful, used generally in radiation protection, which we calculate for adults, children of different ages, and indeed also for the fetus. We do so using this one set of tissue weighting factors that is based on, relates to age, sex, and population averaged risk coefficients. So let's just have a brief look at where those numbers come from. What this shows is stochastic detriment risk per grey to a range of organs and tissues. These are age, sex, and population averaged values. They come initially from incidence data from follow-up studies of the survivors of the A-bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So we start with cancer incidence data, and then that is transferred across populations and then averaged over 7 populations, including the original Japanese population. And then the incidence values are used to calculate through to this quantity called detriment. And what you see there in the list is age and sex averaged values, and then converting through from detriment to the relative detriment so that the values add up to 1, and then simplifying and rounding so there's just a few values of tissue weighting factor. So age and sex averaged information here, and you can see at the bottom there that value of 574, that's the around 6% per grey, converts through to 6% per sievert as the nominal risk coefficient, which relates to effective dose. But we know that, well, the evidence shows us that there is age and sex dependence in the risks. And this just shows a couple of examples for lung cancer and for thyroid cancer. You produce similar plots for other cancer types. And what this shows is an illustration of overall variation with age in cancer risk, so bringing all cancer risk together. So if you look at the dotted lines first, that is the variation with age for males and females separately, for uniform whole body irradiation. So you can express that, and it's for low LET radiation, so you can express that in either grey or sieverts, same thing. And then what the bands show is the variation around that for a range of different diagnostic X-ray procedures, including CT scans. And the difference from the average is just caused by the different sets of tissues that are irradiated in different procedures. So what we're basically seeing in this illustration is the fact that around this value of around 5 or 6% per sievert, there is an increased risk of a factor of a few at younger ages, and then falling off to very low risks in old age. So on the basis of this sort of information, these are the sorts of conclusions that we draw in the report. So effective dose has provided this quantity, which is used to set dose criteria, dose limits, reference levels, constraints, which are applied in the system of protection to all workers or all members of the public. And that approach provides a pragmatic and workable system of protection. We wouldn't wish, although we know that there is age dependence of the risk, we wouldn't wish to segment the population for protection purposes. That would not be a helpful route to take. But I think we can recognise that effective dose is related to risk, and it does provide us with an approximate indication of possible risk. We say possible risk because, of course, below direct observation, levels of dose where we directly observe effects, then we are inferring risk. But on that basis, we're saying it's an approximate indicator of possible risk, and there is this additional consideration of the age and sex dependence of that risk. And if you do the specific calculations, best estimate calculations, rather than use effective dose and the nominal risk coefficients, you get broadly similar answers. But that's not to say that using effective dose and nominal risk coefficients is a good way to get the best value of risk. If you want to calculate specific risk values, then you should use best data, and of course then you're into the realms of also considering uncertainty.
John, we are behind the schedule.
Okay, sorry, I've finished. I don't think I need to. This was just a list of other involvements by Committee 2, and that is Committee 2 at the last symposium, which was also, well, as this will be, very successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.